Alright guys, I'm going to be straight with you here. There's no clickbait here and I'm breaking all of the YouTube rules with this video. I'm going to tell you the secret to becoming fluent in Chinese right from the start of the video. The secret is that you need to watch Chinese television shows. That's right, once again we're talking about watching television shows on this channel. So not only are TV shows fun to watch, but they really can help you with your language skills. So that means you can watch really good dramas like Huan Le Song, a favorite of mine from back in 2016, and you can call it studying. And you know what? I can't believe that 2016 was like 10 years ago now. I swear, I'm not that old, I swear. Anyway, there's an obvious reason why you want to watch television, right? It's because it helps you listen to the language as it's spoken by native speakers at native speeds. But the thing is that there's more to it than just that. The thing is that the sort of television show you watch also makes a difference. So Huan Le Song, for example, was created for a young and general audience, and so the language they speak is unmistakably modern standard Chinese. But then you get shows like Shangchun Aiqing, which is another favorite of mine that is done entirely in the Northeast Chinese dialect. Or you get older shows like this one, Guliang Xiaohua, where most of the jokes are actually in Taiwanese Hokkien. You see, it is true that watching television shows in Chinese will help you get used to standard Chinese spoken at the pace that native speakers speak it. It's hard at first, it's always going to be hard at first, but it will get better over time as you practice. But the real key to learning Chinese is to listen to how Chinese people really talk. And by really talk, I mean dealing with dialects. And that's the sort of thing that's going to be a lot easier for you if you've heard it in the context of like a television show, or if you dare a radio broadcast, or if you really dare like a conversation with somebody from a certain part of the country that you're not sort of used to the language from and you're trying to understand them, right? You're not going to get the dialect issue simply by going to conventional language classes, even if you have a teacher who's a native speaker. You might listen to their dialect. Maybe they come from like Nanjing. I had a teacher from Nanjing once, right? But that's only a very, very small part of the country. In fact, I've got a really good example of this for you. About 20 years ago, back when I was still in college, I took an upper level class on Chinese grammar, and we used this textbook as our guide. So it's called a functional reference grammar, but it seems that its chief function was to utterly confuse native speakers of the language about how their own grammar works. And as I recall, chapter 6 on the grammatical concept of aspect was the most difficult chapter. In fact, I think we spent at least a week in class just trying to figure out how to understand the grammatical particle le and how we were supposed to use it. Yeah, so I'm talking about le, you know, the le at like the end of a sentence. So for example, when it's time for dinner, my wife calls out 吃饭了, that le. Well, it works in that sentence, time to eat, because it marks a change in state. We were not eating before, now it is time to eat, hence 吃饭了, right? I can't emphasize the le the way you do in English because it's a different language, but you get the point, right? The part that got us all confused in this class is that the grammar book from 1981 did not explain that change of state function of the particle. And frankly, that's one of a number of reasons why that book is really, really not good. And I don't know why we were still using it. Maybe our teacher had something in with one of the people who wrote it or something. You know how it is in college. Anyway, the thing is that the precise grammatical function of le actually is not that important if you are trying to learn the language and not trying to like write a article on linguistics. The important part for you is to figure out how native speakers actually use grammar in real life contexts. So I'll give you another example. All right, if you study Chinese anywhere in mainland China, you're going to run into the constant use of the r at the end of nouns, which is called erhua. That's actually the linguistic term in Chinese. To most foreigners, it sounds guttural and masculine, and it can be really off-putting or confusing when you hear it for the first time. Actually, the erhua is used as a so-called diminutive suffix, or in other words, it takes a normal word and describes it as something that is small or less intense. It's pretty much the opposite of that like masculine feeling that you might get. So when we lived in Beijing, again about a decade ago, I swear I'm not old, anyway, I asked a coworker of mine, somebody who was native to Beijing, who grew up there, about the erhua and how it works. And what she told me is exactly what I told you, and also exactly what Wikipedia says. Go figure that one out. They use the erhua if you're talking about something that is little or something that is cute. It is a diminutive suffix. So hua, for example, means a flower, but huar would be like a small flower or a cute flower. Or maybe you're trying to make your language sound a little bit lighter. Maybe you're like trying to be an attractive, like cute girl or something like that, and so you put this erhua in. It's really funny if your native language is English, or if you're used to listening to people from, say, Taiwan speak Chinese, because they don't really use that erhua. Right, so if you're somebody like me and you come across it, you keep thinking, well, that sounds really masculine to my ears. It's my natural reaction, but that's not really what it's intended to do. It is intended to be a very light, sort of light and fluffy sound to the word. So also, for example, wan means bowl, but war means a small bowl, and so on and so forth. Now, you should know that this is not like a communist thing. This isn't a political thing, right? It's, I suppose, communist in the sense that this was the language of Beijing that they started to push out after China was sort of reunified after the Civil War, right? But the truth is that this has been an integral part of Northern Chinese dialects for centuries. And, you know, we can see it in Dream of the Red Chamber as well. In fact, we can see it really clearly in this segment from Chapter 9 that I translated just a couple days ago. At the beginning of this paragraph, the author describes how Jia Baoyu's father, Jia Zheng, was in the study talking with some of his resident literary men. These are unemployed scholars he paid a salary to and gave a home to so they could talk with him about academic stuff whenever he wanted. Anyway, right here it says that they were shuo xian hua, that they were just chatting away idly. The erhua at the end of hua reinforces the concept of xian, or the idea that they were just chatting about nothing. It's diminutive. So that's a really good example of how this erhua works to make something diminutive. And it's extremely common, like I said, in Northern Chinese accents. The more time you spend up there, the more you talk to people, and the more you watch television shows that use that dialect, the easier it is for you to get used to this and to understand sort of where it works and where it doesn't. Now, what I'm telling you is that the best way to learn how this works is not to like memorize a bunch of words. You can get the whole list of everything that takes the erhua, but then you'll realize that different dialects have different rules, and sometimes they break the rules and all this stuff. Don't worry about that. Just talk how people talk. It's also not that helpful to like read the Wikipedia page over and over again and try to memorize that. No, the best way to learn this stuff is to actually learn it in context. Now, you can use some tricks, as I've shown you before in earlier videos. So, for example, you can set up Anki notes and cards that are designed to test you on the grammatical use of certain words or particles in a phrase or a sentence. It's not too hard to put together, and you can use it in all sorts of different cases to remind you that the erhua is a diminutive suffix or whatever other grammatical thing you want to learn. So honestly though, just sticking with like the Anki deck idea really doesn't work that well, and it's not quite as helpful as you would think. Like, I would know I'm spending all this time making videos when I should be spending time, you know, reviewing languages, watching TV shows and stuff like that, right? You have to make sure that you're always reinforcing these concepts with native level audio. And this is really the hardest part for students, especially if you are academically inclined. So there are some of us who grew up thinking that the best way to learn like anything is just to read like a whole bunch of books, right? But the sad truth is that that really does not work for languages, right? The problem is that, you know, these books, so like this book, I love this book, right? It doesn't talk to me, right? I can't listen to it. It doesn't say anything to me. If you pretend that it's written in Chinese, it's clearly written in English. But if you pretend that this is written in Chinese, I can spend all sorts of time reading it and looking up the characters, but they don't speak to me. I need something that speaks to me, because languages in the beginning are intended to be spoken and listened to, not just read. And this is especially a problem for anything that is a dialect. And then you run into dialects that are actually completely different languages, something that is very, very common in Chinese. So here is a map of dialects from a well-known 1987 Chinese language atlas of dialects and languages. Notice how most of the country is green, right? That's supposed to be Putonghua, or Standard Chinese, what we know of as Mandarin Chinese. Okay, so a note on that. The word Mandarin really means official, as in like a court official. Now, the word Mandarin is originally a word from Sanskrit, not Chinese from Sanskrit. Now, that's actually pretty cool, because it's an English word that originally derives from Sanskrit, right? Anytime there's something like that, I think, well, this is pretty neat stuff. We have associated the word Mandarin with China for well over a century now in the English-speaking world. It's to the point where most English speakers, like people like my parents, assume that the word Mandarin means something in Chinese, but it doesn't, right? Mandarin Chinese is just a way of saying official Chinese. This is official as in like the Chinese used at the court in ancient times or the Chinese used in the government right now. That's going to be important in a little bit. Anyway, if we look closer at that dialect map, we'll notice that there are a ton of little numbers within the green. Come over here to the key and you'll notice that the types of Guanhua, or official language, another word for Putonghua, are also differentiated by regional flavor. So even though it's technically the official dialect, the truth is that even Putonghua is going to be different depending on where you are in China. So long story short here, it's a total mess. It's an absolute mess. And it gets worse than this, believe it or not. Here is a similar map from the same book showing the languages of China, not the dialects, but the languages. Now, most of the country is yellow, which is Putonghua once again. However, you've also got certain sections that are colored different colors, especially in the south. So take a look at the key and you will see that the colors represent a number of different language families, with one exception. That exception is Chaoshanyu, or Korean, which is its own language. And yeah, there are quite a few native Korean speakers in Northeast China up into this day. All right, so the obvious question is, how do you tell a dialect from a language, right? You don't, right? Now, this is a question out there for people who are linguists, people who are interested in ethnography, stuff like that. And hey, if that's you, if it applies to you, best of luck to you, go dive right on in. But if you're interested, like I am, in practical advice on how to learn a language, diving deep into this theoretical stuff will not help you. Right? The reason why I say this is because a lot of dialects really should be treated as languages, as completely separate languages, right? So to give you an example, I'm going to pick on Taiwanese Hokkien or Southern Minanhua, mainly because I know at least a little bit about this language. So I honestly don't know that much. I certainly don't know enough of this language to understand much of these old episodes of Shijianqing and find myself relying on the subtitles a lot when I watch them. But I do know enough about the language to cause at least a little bit of damage. So for example, so-called Taiyu has 8 tones, not 4, and they change all the time in a way that will drive you nuts. The so-called tonal sandi rules, or the tonal change rules, are so complex that I really don't think it's worth spending a lot of time to try to learn it, and you will be surprised to learn that the rules themselves are not written in stone and are pretty resistant to actual scientific analysis. In particular, the rule about the final syllable is incredibly confusing, almost as if it were designed to make sure foreigners can't actually learn the language. And so then I asked my wife, who is a native speaker of Minanhua, how in the world the tones changed. What are the rules? How do you remember it? And she gave me one of those looks and she told me that she's never really thought about it and she doesn't worry about it. She just says the words the way that she's heard other people say them. Now, if you're a linguist, if you're into ethnography, if you are like trying to figure out some scientific approach to this, you're going to hate that answer because it's kind of a non-answer. But if you are trying to learn the language, if your goal is to be able to speak the language, if you're like me, I want to go talk with my father-in-law, right? I mean, he speaks, Chinese with this strong accent. Instead of saying 吃饭了, he says 吃饭了, right? If I want to go talk with him in Taiwanese Hokkien, I need to learn the language, right? That's my goal. So I'm going to try to learn the language, knowing all of this stuff about the tonal change rule is this, and you add this and that together and you get this or whatever. That's not helpful, right? You have to focus on what the people say, and you have to listen to how they say it, and you have to say it the way that they say it. If you focus on the complex rules, you might as well go to math class. And that's why the key here is to watch television. So if you really want to learn Chinese at a high level, you've got to start with listening and speaking, and you have to reinforce it over and over again. And you're not going to just get this language from a textbook. You really got to listen to it and you've got to speak it. Now, for Chinese, reading is also important. The characters are essential, but that's a topic for a different video. But remember this. No child learns a native language by memorizing a bunch of grammatical points before they say a word. No child does that anywhere in the world. Every child in the world, at least every verbal child in the world, learns how to speak first, and they learn how to speak by imitating. They hear something and they try to say it the same way, and we think it's cute and it's funny because they say it totally wrong. Then when they go to school, that's where they learn the grammar. That's where some of the bad habits are taken out and we learn how to speak the language properly, right? When you're studying a language, you really need to emulate that approach, and you need to make sure that you're always listening for native level audio and for how people actually say things. If you follow that approach, it's going to be a lot easier for you to master the language, no matter what language it is, no matter how hard it is, and you will learn it faster than everybody else, and people will look at you and say, how did you do that? How did you learn that so fast? So like I said, the secret to learning Chinese is to watch TV.